look at our agenda here. I'm going to do some welcome introductions. We're going to hear from our school board liaison and do a bit of an overview of ACTL. We're going to hear from the Office of Academics about the instructional vision for this school year. And we're going to hear a little bit about the planning factor study. So, good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to welcome you to the first meeting of the school year of the Advisory Council on Teaching and Learning, henceforth known as ACTL or ACTL. You'll hear both terms. My name is Jenny Rowan Rizzo. I am the current chair of ACTL. I'm going to get to introductions in a minute. First, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. One, please note that this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted on the APS website in the ACTL page. Second, for our attendance purposes, please scan the QR code you see on the screen, or you can write your name and the school you are representing in the chat. Other than that, I'm going to ask if you will hold off from writing in the chat for a bit, so we're all staying engaged on the speakers in the discussion. If you have a question that we don't get to answer during the meeting, I will stay on after the meeting is over to talk. I'll stay on, within this meeting, but we'll stop recording, or you can always email me after the fact. Okay, I would like to, I'm going to check and see. I want to introduce more people, but I want to see if they are in the room yet. Okay, yes. All right, now let me change that so that it's not in the right. Give me just a second. There we go. Okay. No, here we go. Okay. First, I'd like to introduce our school board chair, Cristina Diaz-Torres is with us. She is also our ACTL board liaison, and you are going to hear directly from her in a few minutes. From the Office of Academics, we have our staff liaisons. Dr. Gerald Mann is the Chief Academic Officer. Sarah Putnam is the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction. And Carrie Hirsch is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction. Now I will introduce our ACTL volunteer leadership team. I'll name each person and then we'll each take a minute to introduce ourselves to you. We have our Vice Chair, Katie Cochran, Co-Secretary Ann Paris, and Co-Secretary Mike Cieslak. I'll go first with a little introduction. Again, I'm Jenny Rizzo. This is my first full year as ACTL chair. Last year, I was chair for the second half of the school year after Bethany Zecker-Sutton, who had been the chair, moved up to the school board. Previously, I had been vice chair for the first half of the year, and before that, I had spent 2 years as the school rep for Gunston on ACTL. I have 2 kids in APS. I have a 9th grader and a 12th grader. They're both at Wakefield in the immersion program. My current professional field is nonprofit development, but my early professional life was in teaching. I taught both high school mathematics in the US and English as a foreign language in mainland China. All right, so now, Katie, why don't you go ahead, and then Anne, and then Mike.
Hi, everyone. I am Katie Cochran, and I am the vice chair of ACTL this year. I'm also serving as Swanson's representative. The last year I was Cardinals rep, and that was my first year on ACTL, but I have been on a number of similar advisory boards in other states where we have lived, because we move around quite a lot. So it has not been as long as Jenny, but serving in different capacities in different places. My professional background is in nonprofit strategy and analytics, and I work mostly with homeless service providers in that context. I have 3 kiddos, 1 still at Cardinal and 2 at Swanson. And I'm looking forward to working with all of you and supporting Jenny and the leadership team this year.
Okay, I'm Ann Paris. I'm co-secretary this year. My unofficial title is Grizzled Veteran. I told Jenny I would stay for another year if I could be called Grizzled Veteran. I've earned that title because I think I've been around ACTL longer than most everyone else on the committee. My 2 children are out of the nest now, but they were in the Jamestown, Williamsburg, Yorktown pyramid, and One of my two kids also went to Thomas Jefferson High School. My background is in teaching. I taught elementary school before my kids were born. And right now I'm currently teaching through Arlington's REAP program once a week, English to refugees and immigrants. And I am very glad to be here.
Thanks. My name is Mike Cieslak. I am the co-secretary along with Anne, and I'm hoping to learn a lot from her this year. This is my, well, I guess it's technically, this will be my 4th year on ACTL. I'm the rep for Escuela Key. I have 2 kids at Escuela Key, 2nd and 4th grade. In terms of my professional background, it's in education as well. I was a teacher for a number of years, and currently I'm in instructional services for Fairfax County Public Schools. And that's the equivalent of the teaching and learning office in Arlington here. Other than that, I'm an avid pickleball player, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about everybody this year. Sorry, somebody's not going to.
All right, thanks. We will all get to know each other better at future meetings when we're all in person. I do want to thank everyone for being here. Your time is precious, your time is finite, and your willingness to be part of ACTL and collaborate towards the success of teaching and learning in our schools is very deeply valued. So thank you. I will now turn things over to School Board Chair Cristina Diaz-Torres. Cristina, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. And Anne, I will happily get you a sash with whatever title you would like because your experience staying this year is invaluable. But it is so great to see you all virtually, and I'm looking forward to meeting all of y'all in person. For those of you who have not met, I am Cristina Diaz-Torres. I am the school board chair this year. I've been on the school board since 2021, and it's been a pretty wild couple of years. Coming out of the pandemic and returning to normal instruction, there have been a lot of challenges that we've been facing as a school board. And I think that the role that ACTL plays in helping raise issues for us and bring new solutions and new ideas is just really, really pivotal. You're going to be hearing some really fantastic new ideas coming out of the Office of Academics. I think that Dr. Mann and the entire team have been doing really incredible work this summer. And I'm really excited for you all to give us your feedback. Are there things that are missing? Are there things that we need to add? And then what are your initial reactions to it? Because I do think that the work that we're going to be presenting on the instructional vision will be taking us forward into the next decade and beyond. As a school board, we have 3 priorities this year. We are focusing on our student well-being and academic success. We're focusing on our staff engagement, our staff retention, and our staff voice. And then we are focusing on the operations side of things. There's a lot of stuff that's happening both on the construction facility side, but also on things like the HR and the instructional technology side that we're doing to really improve our systems. We've learned a lot over the last several years, and it's really important that we take those lessons going forward with us. And so I am certainly not going to try and dominate all of your time, but I just wanted to pop in and say it's wonderful to see all of you, and thank you so much for the commitment this year. This is an incredibly important committee, and we appreciate all of your voices and all of your contributions. I know that it might seem like we're not, there's a little bit of a gap here, but I can promise you that I, for one, read every single report that comes out of ACTL, and I take every single word very, very seriously. Jenny and I are in constant communication, even in between meetings. And it's really important, all the contributions you all are making. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jenny. And I will apologize because I am in fact going to need to run away in about 10 to 15 minutes and will not be able to stay with you the entire time. But I hope you all have a wonderful meeting.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, I'm now going to briefly sort of overview ACTL. If you joined us late, you can, let's see, I thought I had added the QR code to this slide also, but it's right there. Mike has put in the chat, and if you need to for attendance, you can write your name and the school you represent in the chat. This is a very condensed version of the presentation that I had sent around via email. Please do go through that full presentation. If you haven't already, save it, refer back to it. It has links in it. Reach out with any questions you have. Here's just a summary of our organizational chart. So the Advisory Council on Teaching and Learning is an advisory group to the school board. It's governed by board policy and a corresponding PIP. PIP stands for Policy Implementation Procedure. ACTL reviews curriculum and instruction. It makes recommendations for improvement, and it brings input and perspectives from the representatives and from their school communities. What I consider really special, and what I feel distinguishes this from other types of engagement opportunities like public comment or surveys, is that this is really done in close partnership with APS staff. And we have really special opportunity to hear directly from Office of Academics and other staff throughout the year and talk with them, and then bring that back to communities and then share that community input back up, which is, I think, is a really special opportunity. ACTL Council is made up of representatives from each school, that is most of you. We can also have some representatives from community organizations, which is something the board is working on reviving this year. I keep wanting to point to where this is on my screen, but on the left side of the screen, you see our ACTL staff liaisons from the Office of Academics, who I introduced at the beginning. They support this work, as do other staff from APS. In the big box, you see the list of ACTL subcommittees. These subcommittees deep dive on those topics and subjects that you see there. They have their own chairs and staff liaisons, and they report up to the school board through this ACTL council. So over the course of the year, we'll hear from all these committees and the recommendations they are making to the school board. I will mention that it's a separate application process to be on one of those committees. If you are interested, or if you know someone who is, let me know and I'll point you in the right direction. There's information about it on the APS website in the ACTL section. If you have trouble finding it, let me know. And of course, our board liaison also supports this work. All right, I'm just gonna let you take a minute to look over this graphic on how ACTL fits in with strengthening APS and what we sort of call the cycle of continuous improvement. Okay, let's talk a little bit about our topics for this year. Literacy definitely stood out to us to be a critical topic, or we might think that as a bucket of topics for this year. If you watched some of the school board meeting from last year, you heard about Dr. Duran and Dr. Mann speaking about some of the strategies and new things that APS is going to be doing around secondary literacy in particular. This is also, I think, a critical topic for us because I know there's interest in monitoring the shift at the elementary level to the science of reading and to the CKLA curriculum. CKLA standing for Core Knowledge Language Arts. A second bucket for us is teacher load. When Anne and Katie and Mike and I were reflecting on questions and concerns that came up in ACTL last year, a common theme between them was teacher load and how that affects teaching and learning. On the right, you'll see other topics that we will discuss. Some may have to drop off due to time constraints, and we might add other topics that emerge during the year that are particularly time sensitive. I can let you know that our next meeting in October, which will be our first in-person meeting, our primary topic for that meeting is going to be secondary literacy. We're going to hear directly from staff in the Office of English Language Arts, and also from staff from other departments like English learners, advanced learners, special education. They'll all come and talk with us about how these areas work together to advance literacy. Okay, so how does this actually work? What we will do is bring information and speakers, make time for discussion, listen for common themes, concerns, solutions, and share the ACTL suggestions and input with APS staff and the school board. Your role is to learn about the topics and learn about your school, represent your school community, engage with your school community, and bring your community input back to ACTL. Sometimes when we learn about a topic, we'll have you take information back to your school community, like talk with them, share it with them, gather information and bring that input back to ACTL. Sometimes we'll just ask you to represent or speak on behalf of your school based on your knowledge and experience about the needs and situation of your school. In both situations, it's really going to help you to have a good understanding of your school's strengths and needs, its assets, and its challenges. Here on this screen are a few of the resources for you to get to know teaching and learning at your school. In the full presentation that I emailed, there's more information. A lot of it's linked, so you can just click through to get to a lot of these resources. That longer presentation also deals some of the critical lenses to keep in mind, such as the APS core values and DEI policy. For me, every student counts really sums it up. We so often hear Dr. Duran say that we should know every student by name, by strength, and by need. And I find that to be a very meaningful and tangible way to think about inclusion, to think about academic achievement, and to think about student wellness. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Mike and Katie now to lead an activity on ways that you can engage with your school community. So Mike, go ahead.
Thanks. So Jenny was just talking a little bit about engagement and just being here where you're engaging your school in some of the, the biggest topics that are that APS is dealing with this year. We're immersed in. Some of you are new, some of you are veterans. I think one of the most challenging parts of being an ACTL rep is the engagement of our school communities. So what we'd like to do is just talk a little bit about how we can do that in smaller groups. So what I'd like to do is we're going to break out into about six breakout groups. And before you start talking and all of that stuff, well, basically what I would like you to do is generate a list of ideas of how you can engage your school community. 3, 4, 5 ideas. Go ahead and keep those to yourselves about 2 minutes or so. And then after 2 minutes, go ahead and introduce yourself. And if you need a little bit of help here, why don't you start with the person who represents the school first in the alphabet. So if you're from Abingdon, you'd go first. If you're from Wakefield, more than likely, you'd probably go towards the end. All right. When we get to that point at about 2 minutes, and you're going to be self-monitoring, go ahead and just share one idea. And then you'll just continue around the group, round robin style. So one at a time, and you'll do that until all of your ideas are exhausted. And then after that, just go ahead and as a group decide on 2 or 3 ideas that are your favorites, and pick a person to share those out when we come together as a larger group. We'll spend about 10 minutes in our small groups and then come together for a larger discussion after that for about 5 minutes. What questions have I created? All right. Not seeing anything in the chat. All right, so again, we're spend the first 2 minutes just kind of brainstorming ideas to yourself, and then start discussing round robin. And don't forget to introduce yourself and the school that you represent. All right, here we go.
See.
Awesome. Thank you. How about room 2? So this would be Katie, Cheryl, Todd, and Charlene.
I'm happy to share for room 2. And if I miss anything, we didn't actually designate someone, but I could step in. So, I think like Amy said, a lot of stuff is shared at events. Like, interestingly, a lot of the conversations that I hear at PTA meetings or at events is like a wildly different take than what I hear at ACTL meetings. So I think one of the important things is like getting through to those people that don't pay attention like we all do, right? And so one thing that we did at Taylor last year is the previous ACTL rep, she sent around a Google form to collect thoughts on various issues. And so it was really easy as a working parent to just be able to see my email, click it, fill it in like fast what my thoughts were, and then just, put it aside. Another thing that I did last year in the spring is that I found that there wasn't like really a way to communicate with other parents, and I was new to Taylor last year. And so what I did was I went to the PTA president and I said, hey, can we set up a parent listserv so that parents can just like join a Google group and we can be able to communicate with each other directly. And I think it's a way for you to connect with other people who might be feeling the same way you're doing, or you have questions about, hey, what does my report card mean? Or, hey, why don't my kids have homework? So I think it's just like a really helpful way for people to get in touch with each other. And so now it's like really up and running. It was pretty quiet for a while when it first started. And now I can tell that people are really using it for all sorts of stuff. Heads up about Girl Scout registrations, stuff about the middle school boundary process. So it's been really helpful to have that in place. So I intend to use that, the listserv, and also Google Forms.
Awesome. Room 3. So this would be Jenny, Gretchen, Heather, and Jamisha.
We also did not designate a person to talk. And as I'm listening, I'm realizing that we're like majority English language learner. And I just assumed, I was like, oh, how do we engage with our school community that's like hard to reach? And now I'm like, oh, wait, that's school communities can look all kinds of ways. That's not the main issue everyone's dealing with. And I feel really bad because I kind of took over our group, like, oh, how do we reach these hard to reach populations? But that's
so
I apologize.
We cast a wide net so that we get all of those perspectives. So excited to hear that perspective and just have it be shared with the big group, because I think that's really important and is part of every community, just in different levels. So please don't feel bad.
Yes. So please, my group, jump in if you're like, this is not. So there were lots of interesting proposals made. Jamisha is at TJ, right? TJ Middle School. I hope I didn't get that wrong.
Yes.
So yes. Okay, good. So you talked about like starting early and explaining what ACTL is via your PTA, but you guys also are able to reach a larger audience in your PTA because of like your translations that you've done in your Spanish WhatsApp channel. We also have a Spanish WhatsApp channel, and we have a parent engagement coordinator because the vast majority of our English language learners are Spanish speakers. But what I have not resolved is how do you reach, I haven't totally resolved, like, how do you understand what our Spanish speaking community like wants from ACTL? That's something I'm going to continue like asking, working with our parent engagement coordinator, attending our like meetings. But how do you engage with the communities that don't speak Spanish or English? That's like a very tricky thing. I haven't figured out. People don't really respond to surveys, but yeah, I think Gretchen, I don't know, I might be wrong. Somebody mentioned using Google Forms and standardized questions. We talked about weekly newsletters, daily announcements, and I felt really bad because we do not do weekly newsletters at Barrett. I'm like, oh, we got to step our game up. So to pick one idea that was the best, we did not do that, but that's all the stuff that we talked about, mostly centered around how do you reach non-English speaking populations and find out what they want, not just giving them information, but like learning from them. And that's just like continues to be a challenge.
Thank you. Room 4. So this is Chloe, Emily, Kurt, and Trisha.
So we didn't designate anybody, but I took a bunch of notes. So if the folks in my group want to jump in if I missed anything. Emily, who's over at Campbell, has taken advantage of putting out Google Forms and asking questions from last year about like our ELA program and the initiatives they were putting forward. She also has a WhatsApp group, which Yorktown I don't think has, so I'm very interested to hear more about that. And using the PTA website and the listserv. And then we have a Kurt over at Shriver program who is saying how it's that whole challenge to engage families. It's a little more challenging at the Shriver program since the kids require more attention, but trying to engage parents is always an issue, especially as you get to the older grades. People sort of check out. I've had that experience having been involved in other high school programs. And then over at Cardinal, Trisha had mentioned she was going to focus on putting together some informal focus groups and having PTA meetings to push out messages. And it's the challenges of, again, that it's a big school. It's one of the biggest elementary schools in the county. So she's going to try and get her hands around being able to reach everybody. I'm one of the reps for Yorktown, and actually Tia is here as well, and I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say because I think she's done this before. But I see it as us using the newsletter that's pushed out on a weekly basis, and I really love the idea of getting some Google Forms so we can solicit feedback. And especially with all the new initiatives, I'm particularly interested in hearing about the secondary literacy and the learning centers that they're putting in at Yorktown and how families are receiving that. So did I miss anything, guys? Okay.
Thanks, Chloe. All right, room 5, Belinda, Eric, Kelly, and Sarah.
Yes, I can jump in, and we also did not designate somebody. So we also talked about surveys and getting a Google form, and it was mentioned that there was like, I guess, talk of that or about one being put together that could be shared district-wide, and get kind of district-wide information about what's going on, to collect information about instructional issues going at the school and people's perceptions of those. And then we talked a bit about PTA and using the PTA as well, and the PTA board meeting or the PTA general PTA meetings to get parents involved and get information to parents. And I talked to you about trying to better understand what teachers' perceptions are of kind of instruction and curriculum, but it might be hard to kind of get that time from teachers to talk about that. So maybe trying to connect with the specialists and the coaches in the building who might have more time and be more willing to talk, and they have a broad picture of what's happening in a building rather than a teacher who may have a more narrow view, of their classroom and grade level. The coaches and specialists at the elementary level anyway might have kind of an idea of how things are going, like with curriculum implementation and whatnot across a wider band of grades. So trying to chat with those people.
Very cool. All right, room 6, last, Tia.
So
Well,
I was
okay, go
actually
ahead,
in
Annie.
group 6. Tia,
Yeah.
you're welcome to speak, but I knew you had to duck out for a second. Would
Yeah,
you like
go
me
ahead.
to? Okay.
Sure. Yes.
So I jumped. There were only 2 people in that group, so I was also in there, and a lot of ideas that have already been mentioned. Shannon talked about how sort of a quick Google Forms or QR code, something that you can do at your phone quickly, is something you're much more likely to get a response from than sort of a big cumbersome survey that you have to sit down at your computer and do. So sort of the idea of keeping it simple, so you're more likely to get a response as opposed to something very large and unwieldy. I threw out the idea of, since I've started teaching with the REAP program, that perhaps trying to tap into that community, which are non-English speakers from a great variety of backgrounds, and many of them are parents. That might be something to explore. And Tia talked about, and Tia, you can jump in if I'm missing something, but pushing information out in several different ways, so that, because quite often someone misses an email, someone doesn't see a piece of paper, someone's not looking, if everything goes out, I can hear some schools, it sounds like, use WhatsApp, but social media, there's just a lot of, and even if some people then get the information over and over again, you're more likely to capture people if you sort of cast a wider net. And Tia, did you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I just stated that as the NAACP Education Committee Chair, I've also been in conversation with the superintendent and his cabinet about potential, maybe like town hall type meetings where it's different times of day, not just always Tuesday night at 7 p.m. or whatever, so that people can be met where they are. And you just, if you saturate them with the information, whichever way you can get it to them, because people can't always be there the same day of the week, the same time in the evening, and people are not getting information, and there are families being left out of the loop because of that. So I've been working closely with them about trying to figure out what we can do to get communications out to people, because that has been where the ball has been dropped a bit. And I was sharing with Ann how I, even last year, I had to share with senior parents when my daughter was graduating, and it's like, how are you here with a senior and you don't know what's going on in their lives, but like major things. So somebody needs to get people together and share information, so in any way possible.
Right. Well, we will pull those notes together and share those back with you in case they're helpful as you begin to set up that those systems at your schools. But thank you all for the brainstorming, and Jenny, handing it back over to you.
Great. Yes. Thank you. That was fantastic. We had pulled some ideas and suggestions together ahead of time, and I heard some of those, and I was excited to hear some ideas that were totally new to me also. So thank you very much. I'm going to really kind of go quickly through the rest of my presentation. I want to talk a little bit about, this is supposed to say expectations for engagement at meetings. So I'm sort of like the same things you use professionally or in somewhere else in your life, we can bring those here. We're going to model a culture of respect and professionalism, and most of all, be open to new information and differing ideas. I do want to talk quickly about some logistics. Most of the rest of our meetings will be in person starting next month. By Code of Virginia, we must meet in person. There is a carve out for having a couple meetings virtually. This is one of those. We will have one more, probably either December or January, after people have traveled over the holidays. Additionally, each of you can attend virtually up to 2 of our in-person meetings. So when the time comes, I will send out more information about how to do that. Please come in person if you can. Our hybrid capabilities are only okay. So in person is the best way to really be able to be involved in the meeting, but that option is there if you need it a couple times. Two more important details. One, our meetings are open to the public, and all communications related to ACTL are subject to the Freedom of Information Act. This includes messages sent from personal email accounts and text messages. I don't think this is anything to be afraid of. ACTL exists in the public space, and everything we do is to support the progress of the students in our public education system. And we want to be really transparent about that. I'm not going to have time for questions now on this overview information, but again, I will stay after the meeting officially concludes, and you can always email me if you're not able to stay after. I want now to pass it over to Dr. Mann to talk about the instructional vision. He's going to talk for a little bit, and then we're going to have time for some question and a little bit of discussion focused around 2 sort of questions. One, is there anything you think is missing from the instructional vision? Dr. Mann had said that he would love to hear from you. And also there'll be some time for you to share what you think might be effective ways for APS to communicate about the instructional vision to families. I think we probably have already heard some of those suggestions, but so as you're listening to Dr. Mann's presentation, please be thinking about those 2 aspects. What do you think is missing and how could this be communicated? So Dr. Mann, please go ahead. And do you want me to share, can
you give me rights to share my screen?
Yeah, give me just a second. Okay.
1 second.
Let's see, I think I need to stop. Did it work for you yet?
1 second. It made me go to something else. So sorry.
I'm sorry.
Let's try again.
No.
Sorry, technology.
No, I understand. Well, and going between lots of platforms. All right. I have multiple participants can share simultaneously checked. Any more Zoom gurus than me? Is there something else I should do?
I don't, sometimes there's Zoom settings that require someone to be a co-host if they're gonna share a screen, but
Yeah,
I don't know.
I will go ahead and make you a co-host, Dr. Mann, and see if that helps.
I doubt that it does because it looks like I could share a screen if I wanted to.
Hey, there you go. All right, maybe this time it will work. So while I try to type on my computer and get this to, it's telling me to be able to do this, I have to leave the meeting to share to share the PowerPoint. So I'll leave 1 second. I'll be right back. Just so
Okay. We'll wait.
all right, I'm back. So let's see now if it will let me do it. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Gotta love technology. So again, sorry for the technology delays. So this is something that we in Office of Academics, but also in a meeting with the school board back in the spring, talking about our academic vision, but also then we took it a step further in the Office of Academics, and also tonight we'll talk about our instructional core. And so most of this we'll talk about at the work session on academic vision on September 26th at 9 a.m. And as Jenny mentioned, like to get some of your feedback, but then also some of the work that we'd like to do with ACTL and other groups is actually talking about what does this vision actually look like in action from pre-K all the way through technically adult ed, as we really think about what our vision looks like in action. And so former chair Bethany Zucker-Sutton was the one who gave me that idea, so I give her that credit every time I mention it. And so as we think about what I'll talk about briefly tonight, because I have another presentation to go over with you, is academic vision, and then some work that we did in Office of Academics with our leadership team is developing a theory of action, and then lastly, our APS instructional core. And so here's the vision that we went over with principals today. We've gone over with Office of Academics, but that's where I used to work. APS is committed to providing students with inclusive, engaging learning and assessment opportunities focused on critical and creative thinking, collaboration, communication, and citizenship through high quality teaching at every campus. This commitment to students will enable APS to achieve the goals outlined in the strategic plan and prepare all students for college or careers. And so as you may notice, we've bolded the actual 5 C's here, and we know that we want to make sure that this came out of the counseling world, and these are still applicable to all students, regardless of age, because we know as we think about jobs that won't even, if you have an elementary student, what jobs will they even have when they're 25 or even 18, what the world will look like. So how do we prepare them? And so this is where the idea of coming back to ACTL and other groups, and I'll show in a couple of slides of what does critical and creative thinking look like at each level and at your schools, and then also collaboration, communication, and citizenship. And so that's some of the work that, again, I said we'll do this fall, and that's why this slide is blank. And it's to really developing what this looks like. And so as we'll curate this through various groups, and then actually this will live on our website. Right now, if you click on the academics website, it talks about elementary, middle school, and secondary, but it doesn't tell you what are we focused on, what's our guiding, what's our North Star, and what's going to keep our focus. And so we're excited to come back to APS having academic vision and also an instructional core. These are ideas that APS had prior to the pandemic, and we all remember the pandemic and don't want to remember it, but we put some of those things to the side. And so we've updated some of them, we've tweaked some of the wording, but bringing these back out as we think about our vision and instructional core 2.0. And so as I mentioned, getting vision feedback, we talked to administrators and also our supervisors and specialists on Monday, speaking with ACTL this evening. Next week, we'll talk to TCI, and thank you to Ms. Putnam and Ms. Hirsch. They brought this information, or we'll be bringing it to ILTs. And then if you're not aware, we also, thank you to the school board, we are starting a leadership cohort and also getting feedback from them. And as we continue to get voice from not only our staff members and teachers and community, we're really thinking about who can help us map out what the 5 C's actually look like in action. So I'm going to keep going and we'll come back for questions. Does that work, Jenny?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So the Office of Academics, the supervisors and directors this past summer had a retreat. And as we think about the vision, we know the Office of Academics by number is the biggest department. And we can, like any department, be distracted. And so how do we bring coherence to the largest department? And so out of Harvard, the Public Education Leadership Coherence Framework, and you'll notice there in the core is teacher, student, and content. And many times we can get distracted by all the different things, and you can see on the outside the environment from contracts and funding and all the culture, the structure, but what's going to keep us focused? And so our director of professional learning took us through this process to actually develop a theory of action. And so you may see theory of change, but our team thought that action was better than change. And so that's what we're calling it, a theory of action. And so here's the Office of Academics, and this will be our charge for the foreseeable future. And so if we provide staff with relevant supports, structures for collaboration and focused professional learning, then we will have intentional, rigorous, high quality instruction, meaningful classroom learning, equitable outcomes for all students. And today when we reviewed this for principals, and I continue to beat this drum with our team, is our main job in the Office of Academics is support. And support doesn't always mean yes if a principal wants to do something, but how do we help them? And actually, as you can see, all students, we want to make sure that for all of our students, we're breaking those barriers, we're giving them the ability to have access to high quality instruction. And I also mentioned, you'll probably watch some of it, but I hope you didn't watch an hour and a half or however long I was up there last Thursday with the board doing our data discussion. But we have now data that shows if students are included, our EL students or students with disabilities, in their with their peers where applicable, we're seeing 2 to 3 times, sometimes 4 times higher pass rates if students are included. And so as we can, again, think about all students having access, and how do we continue to advocate that they have access, but again, as we think about support from the Office of Academics. And so this is my charge for myself, but also our whole team, is that we provide the relevant supports, structures, and collaboration. And then again, you can see in the orange box, our hopeful intent is if we do this and we stay focused, that we will see those equitable outcomes for all of our students. And so you may be wondering, so Dr. Mann, that's great. How are you guys going to do that? And so that's where the support menu comes into play. And so you don't have to raise your hands, but if you've ever been a principal or assistant principal, it's a lot coming at you, and every day, all the decisions. So as we think about how we can support them in the cognitive load that they have every day, we've come up with these 7 domains. And so we all know if we go to the doctor, they can send us to a specialist, and you may say, hey, my knee hurts, and they might say you need to see an orthopedic surgeon or physical therapist. So we know that a principal may be able to identify they have a known issue or problem, but how do we help them articulate that in an easy way? And so this is our support menu, and you can see the 7 areas as I mentioned before. And so this will actually be for our principals. This will be an internal document, but obviously we're sharing it publicly because we want people to know what work are we doing. And so if a principal said they needed help with curriculum support, here's what they would actually see in the document. And so on your left, you'll see, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but here's an example of curriculum support to unpack and align written and taught curriculum. And you may hear some of our team talk about in future presentations this year, aligning also to the curriculum framework from the state of Virginia. I always say they give us a secret sauce. They tell us how students will be assessed and that challenge that they need to have. And so how do we make sure that we're providing high quality instruction that's aligned to that minimum standard? And then you can see on your right, all the people that are available as a resource for principals or assistant principals and teachers to support them. So this isn't to tell people that they're doing something wrong, but to be arm in arm with them at the school, to provide them support, to, if we need to model lessons, how do we do that? And so again, how do we bring support alive to our schools so they understand that that's why the Office of Academic exists? And so as we move into our instructional core, if you go on other school systems websites, you may see that they call it their instructional framework, but we're saying that this is our core. And so these areas you can see with our statement in the top is in a collaborative effort with all school-based staff, administrators, instructional coaches, specialists, supervisors, and chiefs will support the following. And as I mentioned that day, that's clear as day that we need to make sure we provide and foster inclusive environments. That's leading the way. And then how are we supporting and really being diligent about our planning, our assessing, and teaching. And so I'm going to go over the next 4 slides quickly because there's a lot of information on them, but wanted to just show the group what will soon be on our website after the board sees it and says continue in this direction. And most of them have seen it. We've been doing 2x2s with the board. And so here's fostering inclusive environments. We want to make sure, and this goes hand in hand with our work on social emotional learning, that we build and foster positive relationships, the community. And you can see here by the words that are bolded that we want places that we create a safe and flexible environment, that we recognize all student strengths, which again ties directly into our superintendent's tagline to know every student by name, strength, and need. And then as we think about our planning, as I mentioned, how are we aligned to our curriculum standards and curriculum framework from the state, but also how are we using the resources that we've procured? And you'll hear next month about our secondary literacy, which we're excited about. But how do we identify those expected learning outcomes for students? But again, you'll see the collaboration that I've asked our team, and they've been doing it, is that when we do presentations, that it's not just Sarah Cruz by herself, but all EL students take an ELA course or a math course that we're special education, that this is a team effort. And so you'll start to see that change from the Office of Academics this year. And then also in assessing that we design assessments that are aligned to our instructional goals, not just our standards. We also use a wide range of assessments and methods and performance tasks. And I also mentioned that to the school board, we're leading the way in performance-based assessments in social studies, which we know most of us for our day jobs, we don't sit and take a multiple choice test, but we have a problem, we have to react to it, to write to it. So how do we continue leading in that way to provide our students rich tasks to show us and demonstrate what they've learned? And then lastly, our bread and butter as an educational organization is our teaching. And to, again, make sure that we maintain high expectations for all learners. And I hope you're starting to see the through line as from our instructional core, our vision, our support menu. It's about all of our students, that how do we make sure that we reach all of them? And I'll end here before going to the next slide is again that we use strategies that emphasize higher level thinking and giving our students the ability to communicate, justify, and to create. So again, I'll end and close before we ask any questions with our vision again, that APS is committed to providing students with inclusive, engaging learning and assessment opportunities focused on critical and creative thinking, collaboration, communication, and citizenship through high quality teaching at every campus. And this commitment to students will enable APS to achieve the goals outlined in the strategic plan and prepare all students for college and or career. And Jenny, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Mann, question, how many minutes do you think you need to talk about planning factors at the end if we don't have any questions or discussion on it? Just how much time do you need to speak?
I think that one may take at the most, let's say 10 minutes.
Okay, all right, I'm just gonna transfer any time at the end of that to our discussion now. So we'll take 10, 11 minutes. I am going to open it up because we will not have time for everyone who might want to speak to actually do that orally. So if you want to put a comment in the chat or an idea pertaining to our two questions about one, is there something you think is missing? Or two, what are your suggestions to APS to actually communicate this to families and school communities? You can go ahead and put that in the chat. We will open it up now. If you want to speak, you can raise your hand. Katie, can you see people for raised hands to be able to call on people?
I don't see any raised hands yet, but yeah, if you can raise your actual hand, or if you don't have your screen on, just do the virtual hand, and I'll keep a running list if it gets long, and just put it in the chat, both with text.
And I'll just say real quick, one, Anne and Mike are going to take notes on what people say so that we can provide those written notes to Dr. Mann after the meeting. And then two, if you're speaking, please try to be very brief, because again, we have a lot of people and not a ton of time left, and limit yourself to one idea. I'm sure you have many good ones, but limit yourself to one to then let someone else share something and let someone else share something. So with that, I'll open it up to anyone who wants to raise their hand to speak.
All right, Jill.
Hi, so this is the first time I'm seeing this, and so, trying to digest all of those aspects and those pieces. But I think we need to make certain that we're very explicit in the academic vision around teaching, learning, and assessment, is that we are really looking at making certain that we have equitable practices and that we're eliminating biases in some of the work that we're doing from a teaching and learning and assessing perspective.
Thank you for the feedback.
Amy.
Yeah, Dr. Mann, how do you connect this vision, which focuses on those 5 C's, with sort of the report card that a parent typically sees, which breaks things out by subject, math, reading, science?
A great question, Ms. Graham. I'd have to think about that one. I don't know, Sarah, if you have any ideas, but that's a good.
The one thing I would say, a lot of the 5 C's are often embedded into our content standards. So for example, in science, the point we refer to them as like the 0.1 skills. It's like the thinking skills, and they all have to do with, they all connect to the 5 C's in different ways, right? How do you become a critical thinker? How might you collaborate while you're learning science content? So in that regard, I feel like when we do report by content area, we're naturally touching on these things, but we don't formally report them in isolation on the report card. But it's an excellent question. Like when we think about how do we help families see how their children are growing in these skills.
Katie Sunderland has a question.
I'll just say, like, I have a hard time following this, as it all seems very esoteric and academic, but just following on like the equity comments, and then also the report card comment that Amy made. I think like a lot of families see that a lot of changes are coming out of APS right now, and that there were schools that piloted these programs, and yet we don't seem to be hearing like the data of how, or the like the report on how those schools did rolling them out, right? So like there's, since like 2018 or 2019, I think they started standards-based grading, and like I have yet to hear anything about like what do discovery parents think about the report cards that they got. Because again, at all these events I go to, like people still are very confused and not happy with the report cards, and then we're like steamrolling it through to all the other schools. So just like one example is like, or like the calendar surveys that were presented to the school board, like it was just very generic terms, but like specifically, what do people think about each policy, percentage of respondents? Like there just seems a lot of gloss is put on these issues and not hard data to the community. I think amongst yourselves, it probably is, but.
Jenny.
I was going to add, in terms of an idea of sharing it with families and parents, I think sort of a top line sort of elevator speech version that I would encourage to be shared via principals directly with their schools. I think it will seem more accessible and tangible to families if they're hearing about it from principals, and then they have someone who they can really ask, so what does that mean here at our school?
Jenny, thank you for that comment. The one thing with what do the 5 C's look like in action? That's where the next set of this work is being able to say, how does this look at Discovery or Long Branch or one of our middle schools or comprehensive high schools or any of our programs, to really start to tease out what does it look like to communicate, and they may be able to add to, and then you think about their exemplary projects, but we do want to make this this is the 30,000 foot part of this, but then how does it then at the school level actually translate, to your point, Jenny, that this is how it looks here for us.
Right.
Amy, do you have a second question, or is your hand just still up from earlier?
Oh, I'm sorry, accident.
I think we'll have time for one more spoken comment, and again, please feel free to put Emily, I see you, go ahead.
Sorry, I've got a newborn with me too. I am wondering, how can families know that assessments are following these 5 C's? If assessments and other work isn't being sent home by the schools, We saw this at my last elementary school. We switched elementary schools this year, and I'm seeing more improvement in work actually being sent home. But it doesn't seem like the district has a set standard across all schools that at least one piece of work should be sent home every week, showing what a student is achieving. It's pretty hard to understand what a report card is saying if you haven't seen any work produced by students. And I'd like to see, the district come across with something, blank statement, each teacher this should be an expectation, because it's really hard for families to feel included and understand that their student is being held to a high academic expectation if they're not seeing work coming home.
I'm sorry that you experienced that, because you're spot on that you should be able to see student work. One of the things that we're also doing, and thankful to our teams that have worked on this, also including teachers, is we're creating district-wide assessments in a system called Mastery Connect, where we can start to make sure that things are aligned to the critical thinking and the creative thinking. And I think Sarah mentioned this, one of the huge parts of science curriculum, and if you're bored and you can't sleep at night, is just go on the video website and pull up the science standards. You'll see that they explicitly say that kids need to create or actually design their experiments, not the teacher designing, but the students need to do that. And so that's some of the work that we're trying to roll out and also support our teachers, but we will also get with Ms. Graves and her team on working on how we set a standard on you should see student work going home. So I'm sorry, Ms. Campbell, that you've experienced that.
Thank you, everyone. I'm now going to have us transition to hearing about planning factors. The planning factor study, this is being run actually from Dr. Mayo's office. He wasn't able to be here, so Dr. Mann has kindly agreed to talk about this with us. I do want to say one thing briefly before he starts, because we often see people confuse the term planning factors with projections. Projections are literally the projections of what a student school population will be, student body size will be, and at each grade. Planning factors are the formulas by which you do your staffing according to how many students you have. So it's kind of a jump back into algebra. And with that in mind, Dr. Mann, please go ahead.
All right, so on behalf of Dr. Mayo, our Chief Operating Officer, I will go over high level. This is a presentation of the kickoff. So we now have a contractor that's doing the planning factor study, Aliview. And so just to go over high level, the project description, objectives, and then the research and analysis and process and timeline, and then any major deadlines and how they will actually do their data collection. And they will speak with certain members of the team, and also then they'll do some extra work. And so you'll see the timeline. And as I said to Jenny earlier, that this is a tight timeline for the group. And so as we get started, these are the people that are involved in making sure that this actually happens. So you can see Aliview, the Dillinger, and then the Equity Journeys partners. But our main contractor is Aliview. And so here you can see the rationale and the objectives here. And so you, as Jenny just mentioned, so our current state for number one is of how we're going to evaluate the effectiveness of our current staffing allocation and practices. And do we identify any obstacles or bottlenecks in hindering this effectiveness? They're also going to propose new planning factors for any students with disabilities and changing planning factors for equity in the allocation of our staffing. And then also, as you can see here for number three, they'll provide 3 implementation options for the school board. And as we know, planning factors, whether they decide that we should increase or decrease them. This will have a budget impact. And then lastly, you can see here for number 4, there will be an ongoing evaluation on the impact and how we optimize processes and allocations for staffing. So as you can see here on your left is how they will start to look at this. So from the quantitative and qualitative data collection internal, and then they'll also look at our allocation methodologies and systems review. And then again, from the external, they'll also do, again, the qualitative and quantitative data collection. And as I think Jenny mentioned at the top of the meeting, our special education from SEPTA and ASAC have asked for this repeatedly. And when I was my first probably week here last year, the 2 special ed directors also mentioned planning factors for special education to make sure that we can support our students. And then you can see here also an EL analysis and then other planning factors as we think about all the other teachers from art to our science, math teachers. And then lastly, at the very end on the right, an equity analysis. And so here you can see how they'll go about getting the recommendation. And here's their methodology. So our current state, stakeholder input, and then what are our APS priorities? And our standards of quality come from the state. So the state will say that if you, don't quote me on this, I'm making up the numbers, but for every 400 students, you need 1 counselor. And do we meet the minimum requirements, or an SOQ is changing? And so that's what the SOQ requirements stand for. And again, that's the standards of quality. And that comes from the VDOE. And then budget considerations, what are the best practices? And then ending on the far right, scenario modeling with allocate. And so that's how they'll come up with the recommendation. As you can see, those 7 areas will help them develop that. So here's our timeline. And so as I mentioned, this is a compressed timeline. And so right now, as you can see where the blue line is, that's where we are. And so they're starting the process of and collecting data and doing their research. They'll begin next week, interviews with APS staff. And then in November, and late October, start their recommendation development, and then implementation planning in mid-November through mid-December. And then they'll have a presentation, I believe, our last school board meeting before winter break. And so I think there's also a work session in November. And so the board is aware that whatever day that they have at that point, that's what they'll see. And then they'll have the final recommendation in December. Yep. So November, they'll have the work session on November 14th. And then the final presentation is that last Thursday before winter break. And then this is the presentation that they actually did with the planning meeting. And so here are some of the things that you can see that they've asked APS staff for. And then also you can see there will be interview time, obviously from people in special education, EL. I might be interviewed, they'll interview school staff as they continue the qualitative march to getting to an actual recommendation for the school board. And that's the presentation. I'll stop there.
Okay, that was great. Thank you. We do have a few minutes. Any questions anyone wants to ask at this time about the planning factor study? Katie Sunderland, go ahead.
I guess I have 2 points. The first one is that coming from my school, Taylor, we don't have real classrooms. They're basically like large cubicle classrooms. It's like just terrible for student learning. And I'm curious whether that takes any, like in terms of school-based decisions, like special circumstances, classroom size, and also like actual walls has any like is that going to be part of the study or have a factor? Like, it just blows my mind that Taylor is subject to the same planning factors as everyone else who has, like, real classrooms.
Ms. Sutherland, we'll have to take that question back to Dr. Mayo and Allaview. I'm not sure if they take that into consideration.
And then my other point is just, I don't really know why, like, necessarily why a huge consultation is needed study on this. Like, to me, like, smaller classrooms are better, and this is a budget exercise. Like, APS, I'd love to see like a historical class sizes within APS, because my husband grew up in Arlington. I have lots of friends who've lived here for a very long time, and they've watched the class sizes go up and up and up and up and up. And so how do we get back to where we were? I'd love to see that incremental creep over the years for Arlington.
Okay.
Jill, go ahead.
Yeah, I know this is just a super high level slide, but I'm just wondering, under that current state analysis, has there been metrics or descriptors in terms of how you're describing effectiveness in order to establish what those obstacles and bottlenecks are against some of those aspects?
I don't know the definitions that Allaview has determined. That's, again, we can take these questions back to Dr. Mayo and Allaview to get you the answers. I think that's a great question for us to be able to have the answer to.
Great, thanks, Dr. Mann.
You're welcome.
I will chime in for a minute to say that you as representatives of your schools on ACTL we have an opportunity to give some input, concerns, whatever you want to call it, to the consultants who are doing this. And so in my follow-up email after this, not tonight after this meeting, but in the next week after this meeting, I will sort of outline how you can provide that. And what I'd like to do is collect thoughts. You don't have to have anything to say, but if you do, so for example, Katie, that's some input that you can give. We'll give that to the consultant. I know this is a discipline and a field that I'm, just starting to learn about along with many of you. And so I don't know what pieces of input will be things that affect the planning factor recommendations versus might not be, but we'll still have collected it, that it might end up being able to be useful in other ways. But so I will follow up, and you can give that what might be sort of either unique to your school or unique to a school like yours that you want the consultants to at least be to know this is a factor or a concern for your school, and then we'll share that in writing with them. So, okay, we are just about at the end. So I want to just close our meeting to say thank you to everyone. Again, in just a minute, I'm going to turn off the recording and say goodnight, but I will actually stay. And any questions you want to ask about how this works, how ACTL works, I'm happy to stay and talk with you. Otherwise, I will see you next month in person. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
And stopping the recording.